Hello again. This week we're going to talk forks. You've all got them. They're in your cutlery drawer. You may have a plastic one now as you're watching this, eating your pot noodle if you can't afford that pret-a-manger sandwich for your lunch. Commiserations if you can't, or maybe congratulations. I don't know. But we all use them. But 400 years ago, we didn't. And just to give you a little background, 400 years ago, you ate with your fingers, or if you had a knife or pair of knives, if you were posh, you had a pair of knives, you ate with those. Food would be brought to you. You'd have a knife, one knife actually, a clean knife. There would be a pair, they'd be identical, but a clean knife for cutting bread. That's fine. And then you'd have your knife for cutting meat and cutting dishes and getting a bit greasy and a bit dirty. And you would use the tip of that, traditionally, to stick into whatever you've got if you didn't want to use your fingers, and you would lift it to your mouth that way. And that's how we, the British, filthy buggers, ate all our food for hundreds and hundreds of years. There was an exception. Very early on, even in the medieval period, we did have a type of fork, and some are not dissimilar to this, but they're often two-pronged, and the prongs are longer, for eating sweetmeats. And that's if you're at the top end of society, you're eating sweetmeats, which of course are candied fruits in syrups, so they're incredibly sticky. Think of baklava today. Pick up a baklava and you've got to go and wipe your hand because there's all syrup dripping down it. So they had sucket or sweetmeat forks. Often, when they're all silver, one end will be a fork, two prongs like that. The other end will be a little spoon. And that's so you can skewer whatever you've got in a little dish. And then if there's any syrup there, you can eat that with the spoon. It all makes sense. It's all well thought out. They didn't just stick a spoon on the end for no reason at all. But other than that, you would not be seen eating anything else with a fork. It was a bit peculiar. It was certainly when the fork came in, and the earliest hallmarked silver fork, entirely silver fork that we know that's English, is the Manners fork. For the Manners family at the Haddon Hall. It's now in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it is hallmarked for London 1632. And the rarity of its survival and the fact that there aren't very many later than that to be found, really up until the Restoration, which is when the fork starts popping up elsewhere, shows that in that 30-year period from 1630 to about 1660, a silver fork was a peculiarity. It was a rare thing. The Manners fork is two-pronged. It's not like the forks we have today. Other forks, like this, are three-pronged. Now, the interesting thing about this is even though this looks like it might be a little dainty sweetmeat fork for picking up this, that, and the other, this is actually what, when you had hard stone, or ivory, or wooden, or steel handled, or amber handled, or variety of materials. When you had a knife and fork set, this is what the fork looked like originally. And it wasn't, as you think, for sort of sticking in and chopping away and all this business. It was much more, you'd chop up with the knife and then you'd lift to the mouth with the fork. So it didn't need to be as robust as the forks that we have today, which are much bigger and thicker, and you know, we stab things with them and crush them, and some of us, they're a bit sloppy at the table, and I'm guilty of this as well. We might only ever use a fork. We might leave the knife in the drawer. Disgusting, isn't it? But it does happen. But at the time this was made, which is about 1640, you would be getting funny looks across the dinner table if you were to whip this out at a banquet and start using it. The problem with forks was, firstly, they were foreign, and we know historically there's always a problem, particularly in this country, if something is perceived as foreign or different. They were often called tridents, quite, understandably. Of course, who has a trident? Satan has a trident, so it's a tool of the devil if you were very puritanical. Even worse than being a Satanist, certainly at the beginning of the 17th century and the 16th century in England, was a sign of being associated with Catholicism. So, you could be a devil-worshipping foreign Satanist, Catholic, and you would be drummed out of decent society. So forks don't turn up. The majority of forks that you see of this period are French, they're Dutch, they're German, they're Italian. That's what this was catalogued as. It was catalogued as a 1640s fork. Now, I've been very fortunate over the years to have a number of rare early pieces of flatware because it's my interest. All now sadly sold, but about 15 years ago, I did have a superb pair of wedding knives with agate handles, beautiful steel blades, and the knives you can place because they will have cutler's marks on them. And by cutler's marks, this is a very good book if you want to get started. It is a Shire guide, but it's by a very clever man. Table Knives and Forks by Simon Moore. And when we say cutler's marks on the blade, and there's a list. There are records of the cutlers that used a particular mark and the period that they used it. And that mark was sometimes handed on to their apprentice, which is why you've got a group of marks here and then a list of names and the periods they used it, because they apply at different dates to different makers. So I had a pair of wedding knives. They were made in London in the 1630s. Very rare and superb things, and I immediately sold them. They had a characteristic which is uniquely British about them. Now, when you look at this, you've got the handle, you've got the fork, and you've got this, which is often called latterly a ferrule or a bolster, and it's this little decorative band that conceals the join. It conceals where this goes into this. There's obviously a little bit of gap, a join, so that's placed over, and that conceals the join. This is, if we can get it in focus, you'll see it is iron, black, and it's decorated, and I may look at this very briefly in close-up, with a little cherub's head surrounded by little flowers. That is inlaid silver onto iron. This means this is a British fork. In fact, it means it's a fork that was made in London. It also means that whilst it was catalogued as 1640, which is fine, it's actually probably 1630. That was the date of the wedding knives that I had. In fact, the chap that made them passed away in the 1630s. So all of a sudden, this anonymous agate handled, that's another thing we'll get to. It is and it isn't agate handled. This agate handled fork, which might have been made in Germany or France or Italy, in the middle of the 17th century, is now an English fork made in the reign of Charles I in the 1630s. And what is the date of the earliest recorded silver hallmarked fork that we know of? It is 1632. So all at once, this becomes a much more important and interesting object. This is one of, if not the earliest, but one of the earliest English silver forks. It is, I would argue, as early as the Manners fork, and potentially predates it by a couple of years. Other features about this that set it apart, when I say the agate handle, and it is that variety of quartz hardstone, but it is not, strictly speaking, agate. It is heliotrope, more commonly known as, can I catch this in the light? Probably not. I'll do a close-up on this handle, I've decided. It is bloodstone. So it's got this green base, this green chalcedony base with red jasper and little iron spots, which fancifully are considered to be the blood of Christ falling onto the grassy mound. That's what it sort of represents. And certainly in the early 17th century, when religion was a really big thing, it would have had that significance in abundance, but it was also thought to be a healing and a purifying stone. So it was thought to have, and certainly would have been thought to have by some, magical properties. So if you were using it to consume food, which you might suspect might be a bit dodgy, and you believe this old nonsense, you could be purifying your food as you're eating it. There is a world of symbolism in all of this stuff and a reason for it. The other feature about this is, and it's an early feature, you'll see these agate and hardstone handles, if you're lucky, on a lot of flatware throughout the 17th and even the 18th century. This very early period, all of this faceting is very, very fine. It's meticulous. You'll often see on most things they're octagonal, and this section here can be a bit rough and ready, and it might have a little tang sticking out with a little button there, which is quite crude. This is, all of you that are interested in hard stones, this is Rolls-Royce quality cutting. Think of the Cheapside hoard in London in the 1630s. And it's actually, rather than being 8-sided, it's 16-sided. And any of you that work with hard stones will know how immensely difficult and expensive and meticulous that is. But it was for a special client, for a special commission at the time, for one of the earliest English forks. And even though we can't quite see it on this, and I probably wouldn't even be able to capture it in the camera, if you look at this silver, which is not a straight section, but it's a diamond section of silver, thicker at the bottom, tapering up, little baluster there, but quite sturdy. It's not a sweetmeat fork, believe me. It's a proper size fork with a knife. The knife would be much longer. The knife would be up to here at this period, but made to the very highest quality. So that was an amazing discovery. It is one of the earliest known English, definitively English by this technique. You can see where a little bit of the silver inlay, sort of damascened inlay, but in silver, has fallen away there. But that is a rare thing, and almost worth the huge evil amount of postage I had to pay to get a little fork to me. You know, whoever posted it to me, and the auctioneer that wouldn't post it themselves, you're going to end up in hell, and they're going to have the. I'll lend this to them, and they'll be doing that to you, you buggers. But I'm still delighted to have it. Wonderful thing, and it's museum quality. I'm very happy to share it with you. And you know, bought this year. Well, actually last month, because they dragged their heels posting it, but of course, you know, it's what people do. Once they got the money, they don't care. You know, but it's there, it's out there, and it, you know, not catalogued as English, thank God, and not catalogued quite as early as it should be. But this is what you can do if you go out and get books and read them and learn a lot. It can give you a slight edge. So I'll leave you with that thought. One of the earliest English forks, one of the earliest forks in England. It's amazing. It is amazing what you can still find. go out there and find it. So until next week, good antiques hunting and goodbye.